If you like to play video games but don't have a lot of money to spend on video games, then you've probably at least considered a game subscription service. Back in the day, we had game rental options like GameFly and Blockbuster, and I think GameFly is still around actually. But nowadays, the big boys of gaming have rolled out subscription services where you pay a monthly fee to gain access to a pool of games that changes over time. Sony has PlayStation Plus, which is a very creative name. Nintendo has Nintendo Switch Online, I guess, if you really want to play Joe and Mac and not any of the hundreds of excellent games from the N64 and GameCube and Wii eras. And Microsoft has Xbox Game Pass, which then got extended to PC users, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I've had Xbox Game Pass for PC for 3 months now, and I figured that I would do a quick review for any interested parties out there who are already PC gamers and want to play a bunch of stuff on the cheap, or for new PC gamers who want to get their feet wet without spending a bunch of money. And I guess this is where I would use my catchphrase right before the title card hits, but I don't have a catchphrase. So here's a bit of background on my PC gaming habits. In the past, I've only had consumer-grade laptops, so I couldn't run much outside of indies and retro games. Then, earlier this year, I built a fairly low-spec desktop based around an AMD Ryzen 5 3400G APU without a dedicated GPU in the build, because of course, by the time I finally built a PC, we just happened to be in the midst of a historic GPU. Compared to past machines, this one is definitely a huge step up in terms of performance. In other words, I could finally play some of the contemporary games that all the cool kids talk about. So I suddenly had a big appetite for AAA games, but I also didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on titles. Enter Xbox Game Pass for PC with a $1 trial month to be followed by a $10 monthly fee. Sounds pretty good, but is it? Is it worth it to sign up for yet another subscription? Is the Game Pass for PC app easy to use? And how's the selection of games? Well, I'm gonna tell you, be patient. Would you like some tea? I'll send you some tea in the mail. Just let me know. Signing up and getting started with Game Pass for PC was pretty alright. Unfortunately, it all ties back to Microsoft, so they wanted me to log into my Microsoft account, which I didn't even remember that I had one. The only time that I use my Microsoft account is when I'm setting up a new PC or when I have the misfortune to use Skype for something, which isn't very often. Then all you need to do is download the desktop application. Easy enough. I have a feeling you can handle that. I have some feelings on the app itself, but I'll save those for a different section of the video. And that's about it for sign up. Not too bad at all, nothing too convoluted. So let's move on to the fun part, the games themselves. Okay, so this is a tricky one because obviously the list of games offered through Game Pass changes over time, so I don't want to go on and on about how 1 or 2 games are worth the subscription just for them to get dropped in a few weeks. But for the moment, for me at least, the selection of games is very good. I think there are over 100 of them on there right now, and the library is a decent split between AAA games and indies, although I quickly found out that I didn't have much of an interest playing relatively small-scale indie games on a desktop computer instead of just on my Switch. And it's worth noting that a good number of the indie games on Game Pass are indeed already on the Switch. If you couldn't tell, I think handheld play is better for lots of side-scrollers and roguelikes and such. And on the AAA side, it's pretty darn good. You've got stuff like Halo and Fallout and Doom and Crysis and Battlefield and Gears, as well as a bunch of stuff that I'll never ever touch. So while I can't speak to what this library will look like in the near and distant future, we all know that Microsoft has been buying up studios like a hungry bourgeois hippo, so it's safe to assume that Game Pass will continue to offer games from those studios. Now, it's worth noting that not all of these games are the same as their Steam counterparts. I've had a tough time finding information about the differences between Game Pass games and Steam versions, but I'll just tell you to keep in mind that just because Game Pass gives you access to a certain game, that does not mean that you're getting access to the best possible version of that game. My big example here is Control. This game is infamous for being pretty hard to run, especially at really nice graphic settings, and it really only shines if you're playing on next-gen consoles or you have a crazy graphics card with ray tracing. Now, when I tried to run the Game Pass version of Control, it was a joke. stutters, black frames, and crashes even on the lowest graphic settings. And not just game crashes, it took the whole PC down with it. Soon after, I bought the Ultimate Edition of Control on Steam, and it ran just fine, even on mediocre settings. Another note, Game Pass automatically gets you a discount if you want to buy any of these games outright. It's not a big discount, but it's something. If you're mostly interested in Game Pass so that you can play a specific game, I highly recommend checking reviews of the Game Pass version and comparing those with reviews of a Steam or console version. Overall, in terms of quality, it seems pretty hit or miss, is what I'm saying. Personally, I've been satisfied with the selection. In fact, even after 3 months, sorting through Game Pass still sometimes feels like Supermarket Sweep or the Toys R Us version that they used to do. There are just so many appealing games sitting there waiting for me to start the download process, which is a different topic entirely. The only times I feel a similar level of excitement on other digital game storefronts is when there's a massive sale and I can afford to grab 3 or 4 of them at a time. But on Game Pass, it's a free-for-all. Constantly. The only real limitations on this front are the quality of the game versions, which we've already talked about, your hardware, and your storage space. Storage space is a big one, at least for me. Coming from the Switch and retro PC gaming, I was not used to 100 gig downloads. But thankfully, I started installing games to an external drive, which basically solves the problem in a single stroke. Load times are longer, but I just don't mind. It gives me time to stare into the middle distance and conjure memories of that one July spent out on the Heath. So that's the games. It's very easy to take a look at the current offerings online, so go ahead and do that, especially if you're watching this video in the distant future. Now it's time to talk about what is perhaps the single biggest detriment to the Game Pass for PC service. I'm not a software developer. Everything I say here is based simply on experience. But it seems to me that developing and optimizing Game Pass for PC's Windows application was not a big priority for Microsoft. It's just the feeling I get, doesn't mean it's accurate. Also, Game Pass for PC is still relatively new, so it could be that there just hasn't been much time or all that many resources to really make this app shine. Also, PC gamers will naturally compare this app to Steam and the Epic Store, and obviously both of those storefronts have massive sources of funding, not to mention years of tweaking and updating, blah, 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 blah. The Xbox Game Pass for PC desktop app does not feel good to use, and that's not pinned to just the UI or load times. About 2 days after I downloaded the app for the first time, the Game Pass app, can I just call it GPA? I'm just going to call it GPA, all right, decided that it couldn't load anything at all. None of the store pages populated at all, just nothing. I got an error message and no helpful details. My internet connection was fine and no games were actively downloading. For some reason, I wasn't able to easily update the app, so I followed some online tutorials that told me to delete the app entirely from my PC and download the latest version. This eventually worked, though it took some restarts as well. Not too long afterward, I decided to download Nier Automata because I wanted to play it, but the app told me that I couldn't download the game because it contained mature content, and the family settings on my account restricted access to mature content. I think my reaction was just, huh? My Game Pass account is not tied to any kind of family group, nor is my Microsoft account. I had never set any kind of parental controls on either of these, and I couldn't change the settings in GPA at all. I wish I could tell you how exactly I resolved the issue, but I honestly don't remember it that well. It was a very convoluted process of diving deep into the settings on my Microsoft account. You know what? I think I had to re-enter my birth date exactly as it already appeared, and that somehow let Microsoft know that the birth date was like correct or something. I put it in a second time essentially, and that told Microsoft that I'm old enough to make my own decisions about the games I play. The only other major issue I've had with GPA was much more recent. I was downloading Descenders, but needed to pause the download so that I could use the internet for something else because my internet connection just isn't capable of handling 2 major tasks at once. The status of the download froze on pausing, which is different from paused, and later, when I canceled the download completely, it froze on the canceling status. When I tried to download something else, the Descenders download would reappear and jump to the top of the download queue, where it would proceed to download at a speed of 0 bytes per second and prevent the other games from starting to download at all. Long story short, I uninstalled some other games, canceled the other downloads, and restarted the computer. One or more of these things seemed to fix the problem. I'm not saying that you'll encounter any of these specific issues while using GPA, but so far, interacting with the app has been less than smooth, especially when compared to good old Steam, and even when compared to the Switch eShop, which is itself not that great. Oh, and while we're here, I'll mention that GPA only lets you use a controller if it's some kind of Xbox controller, which is stupid. If the whole point of Game Pass for PC is to court PC gamers, you should probably at least acknowledge that something PC gamers really, really love is flexibility and options. Personally, I think that even consoles should stop requiring bespoke controller styles altogether, but here especially, it seems like a pretty big oversight or just a petty limitation to force users to either use one of your extra special controllers or use software to emulate one of those controllers. It's stupid. With all this wonderful information in mind, let's bring it on home. Some folks might disagree with me using this as the basis of my argument, but ultimately, the price of Game Pass for PC kind of makes it a no-brainer. I understand that paying any amount of money for a subpar service is a bad idea, but Game Pass for PC isn't really a subpar service. It's definitely not perfect, but it offers quite a lot to people trying to play games on a budget. In fact, let's run through some ideal customer types here. I think Game Pass for PC is great for someone like me who only recently got the hardware necessary to run more advanced games. I also think it's a great option for someone who's new to PC gaming. Game Pass lets you sample so many different games that fall under very different categories and that come from very different studios. You can get a better sense of your tastes without spending hundreds of dollars in the process. I don't think that Game Pass is the best option for very serious PC gamers who already have excellent hardware and a substantial library. Although, even then, what's 10 more bucks a month? Really. If somehow Game Pass still sounds a bit too good to be true, well, under normal circumstances, it would be. But let's not forget the conditions under which Game Pass came about. Microsoft's gaming division had some of the worst PR possible at the start of the last console generation, and in terms of exclusives, Sony won out big time. Game Pass seems like a definite attempt to get people interested in the Xbox ecosystem again, and the price point reflects that. And yeah, it's also a move into a future of games as service where we don't actually own games in any real sense. But for the time being, Game Pass for PC is at least something to try. I'm not even being sponsored here. Kind of wish I was, actually. I do really hope that the Game Pass app greatly improves in the near future, but even if it doesn't, I find myself more than willing to put up with some problems in order to play a whole bunch of games for relatively little cash. But I think that's about it. Thanks for joining me, and if you'd like to leave a comment, I'm in the mood to talk about candy for some reason, maybe because I don't eat it a whole lot. Specifically, your favorite candy from childhood. So let me know about that, I guess. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by.